Controversy swirls over plans by the Zimbabwean government to compensate white farmers displaced in the early 2000s. And the World Health Organization issues a report on the worldwide measles spike. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We'll have those stories shortly. But first, Diane Rwigara, a critic of veteran Rwandan President Paul Kagame, was acquitted by Rwanda's High Court Thursday on charges that included inciting insurrection and forging of documents. The 37-year-old accountant has repeatedly accused Kagame of stifling dissent and criticizing his Rwandan patriotic fronts and yielding grip on power since it assumed control after ending the country's 1994 genocide. Her attempt to stand against Kagame, the country's last presidential poll in August last year, was blocked after she was accused of not submitting enough supporters' signatures and that some of those she submitted were forged. Rwigara's mother was also acquitted of charges of inciting insurrection and discrimination, but Kagame has also faced mounting criticism for what human rights groups say are widespread abuses, the muzzling of independent media and the suppression of political opposition. Now, for more, I'm joined by viewers Edward Rwema. Welcome, Edward.
Thank you very much, Vincent.
So, first, what are we hearing from the government soon after their release?
The government just issued a statement. It's a statement signed by the Minister of Justice, who also serves as the Attorney General. He says the government respects the court's verdict on the case of Diana Rwigara and Adeline Rwigara and will carefully study its implications. They say they condemn all attempts by external actors to inappropriately influence judicial processes in Rwanda, and they will continue to vigorously enforce their laws on electoral integrity, public safety, and respect for the judiciary. So that's a statement that just came in from the Attorney General.
Well, it's good to hear that part where it says they do respect the rulings of the court. But what really has made Diane such a thorn in the flesh for President Kagame?
Just to remind our viewers, Diane Rwigara is a daughter to a former businessman called Asina Paul Rwigara, who died mysteriously in Rwanda. The family believes that the government had a hand in his killing, and most people think that that mysterious killing of her father was what triggered her to want to run for presidency in the country. So you remember that in 2017, that's when the presidential elections took place. She tried to run, but eventually she was not able to because the Electoral Commission said she didn't have enough signatures. But again, there were also other crimes that, that the government charged her.
Now, you know, we've been watching Rwanda over the years, and despite the credit Paul Kagame gets for economic development and quite an impressive growth in the country, there has been a lot of suppression of the media. There is intolerance to the opposition. Are we seeing anything easing up a little bit? Do we see any change?
I would say for the past few months, we've seen the government trying to be a little lenient, especially to politicians, to the media. We should remind our viewers again that just a few months ago, the government, actually the president, pardoned Ingabire Victoire. This is a lady who also tried to run for presidency in 2013. She had been in prison for close to 8 years, but again, the government pardoned her together with a famous musician who the government said was working with anti-government forces. And then the issue of the Rwigara. Before actually this verdict, you remember that the government had released them on bail. So then come today, then we hear both Diane Rwigara and her mother, they were let free. So I believe something is changing. Again, like you said, some people think there's a lot of pressure from partner countries. One would also remind our viewers that just last week, a couple of U.S. lawmakers issued statements condemning the continued imprisonment of Diane Rwigara and requested that the justice be dropped.
Well, we just want to hope that eventually everybody will have the freedom to speak their mind and participate in the political process. Thank you very much, Edward.
Thank you so much, Vincent.
That's a viewer, Central Africa journalist Edward Rwema. The United Nations Human Rights Office on Thursday said the Burundian government has asked it to leave. Now, this comes months after the outgoing human rights chief, Zaid Ra'ad al-Hussein, called the country one of the most prolific slaughterhouses of humans in recent times. Spokeswoman Rabina Shamdasani in Geneva confirmed they received a letter on Wednesday requesting them to close the office. Sources within the UN office in Burundi told the Associated Press they were given 2 months to leave. Burundi has been pulling back from international criticism, making history a year ago as the first country to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. Not too far to the south, the Zimbabwean government is planning to move forward with a controversial plan to compensate white farmers whose land was seized during the country's land reform era in the early 2000s. But farmers say the $53 million in compensation is not enough, and the land should also be returned to them. Columbus Mavunga reports from Harare.
In 2008, Zimbabwe's government seized Ben Frith's family farm in Chegutu district, southwest of Harare. The redistribution of land from white to black Zimbabweans was part of efforts to reverse the injustice of colonialism. But the forcible seizures and lack of compensation triggered Western sanctions that, along with poor farm management, helped cripple Zimbabwe's economy.
It's very sad to see it in the shape that it's in now. But you know, the thing about this, though they've taken away the main structure, the foundations are still here.
Zimbabwe's Commercial Farmers Union welcomed a government decision this year to compensate nearly 4,000 mainly white commercial farmers like Frith, whose land was seized. But the Farmers Union says the $53 million set aside for the compensation is far too little. Zimbabwe's Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Mutuli Ncube, says they are still negotiating a final amount.
We have received a figure from the farmers in terms of the amounts that they need for compensation. We as government are also in the process of completing our own valuation, independent valuation of the improvements on the land. We are very close.
Peter Knife is a headman for one of the black farmers given part of the Mount Carmel farm by the government. But he says he would like to see it back in the hands of commercial farmers like Frith.
These farmers are struggling with farming. White farmers should not be paid. They should be given back their land. If they were still around, I would not be working herding cattle in a bush.
Zimbabwe's government is unlikely to give the land back to white farmers. It would be seen as reversing efforts to erase all traces of colonialism. But Zimbabwe hopes that by compensating farmers, it will be seen as respecting their rights, which could one day lead to Western sanctions being lifted. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Harare.
Well, the Feeds Advocacy Initiative, alongside other partners, met last week in Washington to discuss new approaches to Africa's education. Africa 54's Esther Githu-Yuwat joins us with more information on the advocacy's mission. Esther.
Thank you, Vincent. I am told the discussion aims to awaken young Africans to the many education opportunities in the continent. And joining me now is Ambassador Robin Renee Sanders, CEO of Feeds and former U.S. Ambassador to Nigeria and DRC, who also co-hosted the event. Ambassador Sanders, welcome back to Africa 54.
Thank you so much.
The first question that comes to mind is why the interest to educate the next generation of young Africans?
I think there are really two major ones. I think most people know that Africa will have the largest population in the world in about 2035, but nearly 70% of that will be children or young people under the age of 30. And so if you're looking at where the continent is going to be for the next 2 or 3 decades, you really have to focus on what kind of educational systems the African young people are experiencing and what their opportunities are.
What is the new approach? What is unique about the new approach that you think may work better than what already exists in terms of the general education curriculum for young Africans?
I think the main difference is this focus on entrepreneurial thinking, not necessarily being an entrepreneur, but how do you problem solve? How do you problem solve to help development in your particular country? When we hosted the 5th annual Gallup Feeds event last week, we had really 3 institutions that are doing incredible things. One is the African Leadership Academy, the other is Asheshe University, that's in Ghana. African Leadership Academies in Johannesburg, and then we had a incubator, a company that supports incubators called Venture Garden Group, and they are all looking at focusing on how do you think entrepreneurially to address development problems. So the whole approach to education is different. It's not your standard, learn facts and figures and history dates, but it really is, how do I contribute to my nation? How do I contribute to my economy? How do I problem solve? And how do I support either myself and my family?
And that brings me to the question of the role of the private sector here, because as you educate these children, you want to know where they're going to end up, what kind of careers are they going to have. What do you see as the role of the private sector?
I think that to me is kind of the old way of approaching sort of what do you do next. I never say the word employment, I say job creation, because I really believe that you have to have both. You have to have formal employment that you're talking about, but you also have to have a way for people to create opportunities for themselves. And that's where that entrepreneurship and that entrepreneurial thinking comes in. If you have a population of 2.5 billion people, the largest, Africa will have the greatest working age population than the rest of the world combined. And so you're not going to have enough formal jobs for that. You have to find a way for people to create jobs for themselves. And that's what these institutions are doing.
So what approach would you employ here? When you think about U.S. education initiatives for Africa, including YALI, they bring a couple of, young Africans to the U.S. during summertime. They learn, a number of things. And these are highly, brilliant kids. But you can't bring all of them to the United States. What is the methodology here? What can you employ to make sure that they get educated, quality education, where they are, right in the continent?
Well, that's why I think the institutions that we brought last week are doing that. These are African-created, Pan-African institutions developed and designed by Africans on the continent for the young African generation. And that's what makes them unique. Yes, you can have donors like ourselves that help, but we can only help and have a synergy. But really, it's institutions built and created by Africans that are really going to make the difference. And so you have ALA in South Africa, you've got Asheshe, you've got a number of private sector entities that are creating entrepreneurial institutions around the continent. And to me, those are more the answer than the donor assistance. Donor assistance is just a synergistic avenue to shore up what's being done on the continent. It's not the be-all to end-all, and it's not the answer for everything. It's got to come from Africans, and that's what I see happening, and that's the new approach, and that's what's different.
And very briefly, how are you engaging African governments in this?
I think these institutions are working very closely with their policy leaders and policy makers. Other than that, they wouldn't, be successful. And so I think there is that partnership between what the needs of the country are, what these institutions can train young people in, and that's the work skills development connection that has to be there.
Ambassador Sanders, thank you.
My pleasure, as always.
Ambassador Robin Renee Sanders is CEO of FEEDS and a former U.S. ambassador to Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Vincent, back to you.
Well, thank you. Now, a private funeral service is underway for America's 41st President, George Herbert Walker Bush, as his family says their final goodbyes in his adopted hometown of Houston, Texas. The late president's body was flown from Washington to Houston Wednesday evening and was taken to St. Martin's Episcopal Church, where it lay in repose overnight as the public entered single file to view the flag-draped casket. Early Wednesday, 5 living American presidents assembled at the Washington National Cathedral for the state funeral for President Bush, who died last Friday in Texas at the age of 94. President Donald Trump, the current U.S. Commander-in-Chief, had declared Wednesday a national day of mourning, closing federal agencies, suspending regular mail delivery, and closing stock markets. After Thursday's private services, President Bush's body will be taken by a specially designed train 120 kilometers north to the Texas city of College Station for burial at his presidential library on the grounds of Texas A&M University. Now, White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara has more on the state funeral of George H.W. Bush, the man who left a legacy at home and abroad.
I am the resurrection and I am the life, says the Lord.
The state funeral for former President George H.W. Bush, attended by American and international dignitaries, politicians, family, and friends. Also present, all living former U.S. presidents, from Barack Obama to Jimmy Carter. Tradition dictates the current president delivers the eulogy. But at the wishes of the late 41st president, it was given by his son, the 43rd.
We're going to miss you. Your decency, sincerity, and kind soul will stay with us forever. So through our tears, let us know the blessings of knowing and loving you, a great and noble man, the best father a son or daughter could have.
President Trump was present to pay his respects, despite an acrimonious relationship with the Bush family. This stemmed from the 2016 Republican primary campaign when Trump mocked his rival, son Jeb Bush.
I think he's a very low-energy person.
And also the late Bush.
When you have an ex-president dying, no matter what you might think of them, don't extend the feud into the mourning period. But it's probably a passing truce. You're not going to see much love between President Trump and the Bush family 6 months from now.
He said, the smaller the country, the longer the speech.
But the love and respect was evident for the late president, who left behind a legacy felt not just at home but around the world. He led an international coalition against Saddam Hussein after the Iraqi leader invaded Kuwait. And it was under his watch that the U.S. and the Soviet Union ended the Cold War.
Bush was the perfect man for a seamless transition. Low pressure. He recognized that there was no point in rubbing it in, insulting the Russians while they were down.
But despite his triumphs abroad, Bush failed to get re-elected in 1992, losing to Bill Clinton.
As great as George H.W. Bush was in foreign policy, he didn't have the same kind of vision and the same kind of skill when it came to policy at home. He never really strongly responded to the recession that came right before the presidential election of 1992.
The National Cathedral's bell tolled 41 times, signifying the late leader's place among past and current presidents. He will be buried at the family gravesite at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum in Texas, next to his wife Barbara, who passed away in April. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, as missile surges, decades of progress are in jeopardy. But first, a look at Thursday's headlines.
Very tough.
And it was also South Africa's first international gold medal for skateboarding.
Well, it's time for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54's health correspondent Lino Madu with World Health Organization news on climate change. Lino.
That's right, Vincent. As the new round of global climate talks kicked off this week in Poland during COP24, the World Health Organization says exposure to pollution results in 7 million deaths every year. According to WHO, climate change affects a number of diseases, such as asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, lung cancer, stroke, ischemic heart diseases. Speaking during UN Conference of Parties 24 talks on climate change in Poland, WHO's officials say a number of pulmonary and heart diseases caused by pollution were not included in decision-making processes and documents related to climate change. They say mitigating climate change will save millions of lives at a global level.
We would point out that the Paris Agreement cites the right to health in the opening sections of the Paris Agreement, and that Article 1 of the UNFCCC is about avoiding adverse effects of climate change. That includes avoiding adverse impacts on health.
I think if we want to protect health, if we want to make sure that we will reduce dramatically those 7 million deaths that are occurring every year due to exposure to air pollution, we need to accelerate this energy transition. We know that there will be a transition, but we want to tell countries, more you delay this transition, more you will be responsible for the number of millions of deaths that are occurring every year.
COP24 talks are billed as the most important UN conference since the landmark Paris 2015 deal on climate change. Over the next 2 weeks, the aim is to make an end-of-year deadline for agreeing a rule book on how to enforce global action to limit further warming of the planet. Now, in a report issued Wednesday, the World Health Organization warns of an increase in the number of worldwide measles cases. The WHO says there was a 30% rise in global measles cases in 2017. Measles is a highly contagious childhood infectious disease caused by a virus. Symptoms include fever, cough, and runny nose. The World Health Organization says huge progress towards eliminating measles has been made since the year 2000, avoiding some 21 million deaths through vaccinations. However, the breakdown in the health infrastructure of fragile countries and hesitancy towards the vaccine by parents in wealthy countries is creating a, quote, worrying uptick in the number of measles cases. Martin Friede is director of the Department of Immunization, Vaccines and Biologicals at the WHO.
Measles can be fatal. However, fatalities are relatively rare. Less than 1 in 1,000 children actually die from the measles infection. However, what is far more common are neurological consequences. This can cause blindness. It is one of the leading causes of blindness. It can also cause pneumonia, and it can cause severe cerebral deficiencies. Ensuring that every child receives 2 doses is a worldwide issue. Every single person has a role to play in this, from the parents and the caregivers, to the healthcare workers, through to the immunization program managers, through to the government. Everybody needs to be working towards ensuring children get 2 doses of the vaccine and that this disease is eliminated.
Measles remains a common disease in many parts of the world, including areas in Europe, Asia, the Pacific, and Africa. Now, people worldwide observed the 30th annual World AIDS Day last weekend, but patients in Somaliland, the breakaway region of Somalia, say the stigmatization and discrimination against them are more bitter than the virus.
In Hargeisa city, there is no official estimate on the people infected with HIV, but according to the UN report in 2014, the number of people in Somaliland living with the virus was estimated at 35,000. Local medical officials say the epidemic spreads at alarming rate due to poor access to voluntary counseling services, denial, stigma, and late treatment. One HIV-positive mother lives in the shadow, veiled in secrecy, as she faces daily stigma and discrimination from the society. The mother, who asked not to be seen or named on this report, says her former husband infected her with the virus 12 years ago before he died of the disease.
AIDS patients are evicted from homes. They can't rent homes, they don't get education, they can't buy stuff, and they have zero life. Some are being discriminated by society, while others discriminate amongst themselves.
The mother says the intense stigmatization of people living with the virus might force patients to transmit the disease into the society. In this conservative society, the children of HIV-infected parents face discrimination for no reason other than the fact of that their parents have the virus.
I know if society welcomes the patients, they welcome them back, and that can reduce the HIV transmission. We need the society, and they need us too, and we will prevent the virus to be spread.
In this conservative society, the children of HIV-infected parents face discrimination for no reason other than the fact that their parents have the virus.
Recently, 2 students were expelled from public school due to their parents' HIV status. We resolved that issue, but we will take the necessary action against anyone in public institutions who is found to be discriminating against HIV patients.
Authorities in Somaliland urge voluntary testing, but most people remain avoiding associations with people living with the virus.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter @LenorMoudou. Vincent, back to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Lenore. I'll be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. From fighter jets to a range of armored vehicles, international defense industry heavyweights are promoting their newest military hardware. It's the first time Egypt has hosted an international weapons fair. Organizers hope the event will project a message to the world that Egypt is now secure and stable. The 3-day Egypt Defense Expo has attracted participants from dozens of countries. Anti-terrorism equipment is among the latest technology that is now playing a major role for defense industries. Everything from facial recognition software to drones, jammers and sensors are attracting interest. And that's what's trending today. Well, and that's our show for today. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us in Washington, I want to wish you a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Woodwork is any part of a house or building that is made of wood.
Crawl out of the woodwork.
This expression sounds troubling.
I won! I have the winning lottery ticket.
Oh, that's great. How much money did you win?
I won $25,000. But please, don't tell anyone.